Hello, people of the internet. I am not Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, but do not worry, he is here. Welcome to the first episode of Fully Endorsed, the YouTube equivalent of that thing where you recommend a movie to a friend and then have an awkward conversation to find out whether or not they liked it. So, Andres, say hi, I guess, on your channel.
Hello, people of the internet. This is indeed the real Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and I am very happy to do this thing again with one of my closest friends, Dillion McCandless. We've been podcasting since, I want to say 2013 or 14, back on Bill's channel, Zazabar, for the Sons of Sarazawa podcast. And yeah, it's been a while since we've done a podcast of sorts, and you approached me with this idea of that, what you just said, that thing where you recommend stuff to other people, to your friends. And since this was essentially your baby, it only makes sense that you host this particular episode. And since this is a brand new series, would you like to go over like the sort of format of how this show is how this show is going to go?
Yes, this is the inaugural episode, the maiden voyage, if you will. A brief explanation of what we're doing here. So, standard YouTube podcast style, two people talking about a piece of media. You've seen this everywhere. Think Caravan of Garbage if you're a Weekly Planet person, etc., etc. A million people do this. Millions of people do this sort of thing. But the catch is that the thing that we recommend each week has to be something that the other person has not seen. And so every episode you're going to get a fresh take from somebody who has just seen this thing for the first time, discussing it with somebody who knows the material more intimately. And I feel like we'll get some interesting mileage out of that.
Oh, yes. I was going to say certainly, because I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you are familiar with that I am not, and I'm sure there's something out there that I know that you're probably unaware of.
Sure, we have very similar wheelhouses, but there are differences.
Right, such as the topic of today's episode. Indeed.
So, obviously the person who recommended the thing will take over hosting duties for that episode, which is why you're listening to me and not him. And then at the end of the episode, the other person will announce what they're recommending for the next episode. We'll be doing these twice a month is the idea. So we'll see how this goes. And for the topic of this first video, we are going to be talking about the 1999 film Galaxy Quest, which I recommended for a number of reasons. One, I had been meaning to watch this again anyway because I was on a bit of a Star Trek kick this year. I even watched The Orville. And also the film is actually about to experience its 20th anniversary.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But also because recently in a Skype call between myself, Andres, and Bill, he mentioned that he had never seen it before, which blew my mind. So I thought, let's do this for the first episode. Andres, I guess... general thoughts. Did you enjoy Galaxy Quest?
Oh yeah, I really dug the hell out of it. There's something about the 90s era of filmmaking, even though this is technically at like the tail end of the 90s, right, like, going right into the 21st century. There's something about that I miss about 90s filmmaking, where it's like, it's sort of like looking at past past franchises, or looking at past sci-fi tropes, or past like common genres, and looking at them with a bit of an ironic edge to them, but at the same time fully embracing the camp and charm that comes with those sort of things. I think the one that comes to mind immediately would probably be like Independence Day, where, as it's goofy as hell, although you can probably think like it may be intentionally so, but it's not so much where it's like super cynical, because I feel like once you get into the 2000s, that's where the cynicism reaches an all-time high. But here, this seems to be like, despite me being somewhat of a passing, casual, not fan, but admirer of Star Trek, I feel like I can feel like the love that came from this movie, and like the sort of admiration and reverence that the filmmakers had for Star Trek in making this sort of, not quite a Star Trek spoof, but rather sort of a Star Trek tribute, in a way.
Yeah, and you just touched on something that is really the main thesis of the first major question I wanted to ask you. And you're absolutely right. This movie is definitely a time capsule of 1999. It definitely has that late 90s, early 2000s sort of aesthetic and feel.
Mm-hmm.
Very nostalgic for old people like us. So my question is, having such little engagement with the Star Trek franchise, I'm sure you've seen a little bit here and there.
Mm-hmm.
How well do you think the humor worked for you in Galaxy Quest? Did you find this movie accessible?
Oh, yeah, I definitely thought so, because I feel like Star Trek is one of those things where everyone is familiar with to some degree. People know the general look, the feel, and vibe of Star Trek. People, like, again, I'm someone who caught like maybe 1 or 2 episodes of the original series on television back in the day. I haven't seen any of the classic movies, so maybe we might see some of those on this show.
Those in the future.
But yeah, I know the Klingons, I know Spock, I know Bones, I know Takei, I know Uhura, I'm aware of Captain Kirk, so it's like I have a general feel and vibe for what the show is. I know it's about a team of space explorers that go to different planets and interact with certain people. They lose a couple red shirts along the way, so even for me, who is someone who has never really delved deep into it, I've seen enough like parodies, tributes, homages, whatever, to get the general vibe. In fact, I want to say the very first Star Trek parody I'd ever seen was from the Animaniacs, if you remember that particular episode as well. As someone who's going right into this, I can feel like a lot of the sort of homages did not fly over my head. I feel like I got who was supposed to be this, which characters were supposed to embody which roles from the original series. I got a vibe for the general aesthetic. Us being fans, like geeks, geeky fans who have attended conventions in the past, I get the general vibe of what a Star Trek convention is. And I'm aware of all the tropes that, and the general stuff they sort of make fun of. So the humor there in terms of like, hey, we're doing this thing. Do you recognize this thing? Because we're gonna put a spin on this thing. It's something that I didn't miss as a non Star Trek fan. But I do like that a lot of the humor did not rely so much on it being a Star Trek homage. I feel like a lot of the humor sort of works in its own right, actually.
Yeah, definitely. I think the film is very accessible because a lot of the jokes, specifically the ones related to actually parodying Star Trek, are pretty basic things that most people in the sort of the zeitgeist already know about Star Trek anyway. There are very few jokes in the film that are really sort of inside baseball or require a bit more knowledge. Most of it is pretty basic Star Trek that everybody knows. I'm glad that you mentioned the convention thing in your response there, because that's another genius thing about this film, is that in addition to parodying Star Trek, it's also parodying the Star Trek convention and sort of the fan culture and all of that sort of going around it. It's a movie about actors who don't like being typecast. It's almost a Leonard Nimoy biopic in that way.
Right. Didn't like Nimoy have to come out with like a book that says "I am not Spock"?
Yeah, he did that. He got a lot of backlash for that, and then years later he released another book called "I Am Spock," which I believe he had sort of come to terms with the whole thing. But in the 70s, I want to say, he was really struggling with that.
Because like he was the only other movie I can recall him being in was like I know he was probably in roles here and there, but I do remember he was in, what was it, Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
Yes, he's in that.
Yeah. At least that's more than what I can say for William Shatner.
Yeah, let's see. He was in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. He did voice work in Transformers, the movie.
He was Galvatron.
Yeah, he also did some directing work. He directed the 80s comedy 3 Men and a Baby. Don't know if he directed the sequel or not. Probably not. Right. Shatner did mostly TV work, aside from, his appearances in Star Trek things.
Mm-hmm.
So
I can only imagine where the rest of the cast went.
Yeah, that's all very true. But yeah, going back to the convention thing, that struck me on this most recent viewing for this video. I've never been to a Star Trek convention. But we've been to G-Fest.
Right, yeah, which is kind of the same thing, just on a
several times.
Much, like, smaller scale.
So even though I've never walked into a bathroom and saw 3 Klingons hanging out at a urinal, I've had very similar bizarre experiences.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that.
So it's
He's like, wait a minute, I know what these fellas are talking about in the next stall.
Yeah. So it's very relatable in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess that covers general thoughts. I guess we should move on to the more nitty-gritty. Star Trek shows, by and large, live and die by their ensembles. Mm-hmm. And I think that is also very, very true of this film. This has an amazing cast, people that you would never expect to work together in 1999.
Right. And I was really surprised with who was in this movie.
Yeah, and they pull them all together. You have Tim Allen, Sigourney Weaver, Alan Rickman. This is probably my favorite Alan Rickman performance.
Really?
Tony Shalhoub is a lot of fun in this movie. Young Sam Rockwell, who has one of the funniest parts in the movie. And also a baby Justin Long playing...
Oh, yeah, that was right. I saw him at the end. I was like, wait a minute. I know this guy. He's going to become a walrus one day.
Baby Justin Long playing all of us when we were 13. And and it's a fantastic cast. Not to mention the Thermians, the sort of main aliens in the movie. A lot of familiar faces amongst them. I don't know if you noticed, but one of them is what's his name? Dwight from The Office.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, he's one of the 3. He's one of the ones that comes to pick up Tim Allen at his house at the beginning. Rainn Wilson, that's his name.
Oh, okay. And also, like, Tony Shalhoub, I feel like I've seen that character. He like, Tony Shalhoub seems to be like one of those actors where, like, you recognize their face. You've probably seen them everywhere, but never got the chance to know who exactly they are.
I mostly know him for that show that he was in, Monk.
Huh,
in the 2000s, I believe is when that was running. I never actually watched it, but a lot of people did, and I heard a lot about it.
Wait a minute! I remember him. He was like one of like the henchmen from the evil, like the main villain's henchmen from Spy Kids.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was what has Sam Rockwell been in?
Oh well, the most recent thing that comes to mind is that awful Poltergeist remake. But before that, Iron Man 2.
Oh, okay. Oh, was he like the quote-unquote villain of that, what's his name? Not Stark.
Yeah, Justin Hammer.
Hammer, yeah. I know it was like big rich guys. Okay, huh. Interesting, yeah. I saw him, I was like, wait a minute, do I know this actor?
He's also the teenage Foot Clan member who, like, who's like, we got everything you want, and then the guy's like, you got cigarettes, and he's like, regular or menthol? He's that guy.
Oh wow. You know what, this casting reminds me a lot of like Mars Attacks, where Mars Attacks felt like the culmination of like the classic actors you knew from the 80s and 90s with like the next generation of actors who would go on to do bigger things in the 2000s and 2010s. Oh yeah.
Oh, you know, another place that you probably have seen Tony Shalhoub is that he was that alien in the Men in Black movies that if you blew his head off, he would grow it back.
Oh yeah, wow, that was him? Dang.
Yeah. So he's been around.
Yeah, definitely. And as for like Tim Allen, Sigourney Weaver, and Alan Rickman, it's like, yeah, you couldn't get like a perfect ensemble of actors right there. I mean, everyone knew Alan Rickman from before, I'm sure, as like the villain from Die Hard, and he would eventually go on to do Professor Snape from the Harry Potter series. Sigourney Weaver needs no introduction, but of course she's from the classic series Alien, the Aliens franchise. And we have Tim Allen, who just came, I think this was like right off the heels of Home Improvement, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I'm going to look up the years for Home Improvement real quick. Okay. I think you're right. I think he was just coming off of Home Improvement. And I think that really helps his performance in this movie, because he kind of knows what it's like to be this guy who's associated with this thing, and I think he sort of was able to channel that experience into the character.
And the funny thing is, it's like...
Home Improvement ended in May of 1999, so this is like fresh off of that. Matter of fact, he would have still been on Home Improvement when he was filming the movie.
I see. So it's funny because I think nowadays Tim Allen is probably in the same position that his character Jason is in, like in the movie itself. Because these days you don't really see Tim Allen anywhere outside of like playing Buzz Lightyear for the 4th time this year.
It's true. It's true. He's known for Buzz Lightyear and like that's that's his entire legacy.
Although, given that this was 1999, Toy Story was already out, so I was wondering if he somehow was like was sort of harkening back to Buzz Lightyear when he was playing Commander Taggart, if he was channeling Buzz Lightyear.
Possible, but if they ever decide.
Sorry, I was gonna say I can imagine like Buzz Lightyear saying like "Never give up, never surrender, and beyond."
Yeah. If they ever decide to make a 4th of the Santa Claus, he'll be all over that.
Oh, most definitely.
But yeah, really interesting. Like that's really the wild card, is having Tim Allen alongside Sigourney Weaver and Alan Rickman.
Right.
Like, what an interesting trio that is.
Yeah, I feel like they work off each other so well, with Tim Allen sort of being like the goofy, down on his luck, but still somewhat very relatable schmuck. You got Alan Rickman, who takes his work a lot more seriously than Tim Allen's character, and you got Sigourney Weaver, he is having so much fun in this movie too, Alan Rickman. Oh yeah.
He has so much great stuff. By Grab Thar's hammer, what a savings is like the funniest line.
And like, of course, Sigourney Weaver, she's like sort of caught in the middle of their feuds often, and so she's sort of like the voice of reason that tries to keep the whole team together.
Yeah, I really enjoyed how she's got like this one job and it's stupid, but she's gonna do it.
Right, I remember
that whole thing was very, very interesting. That feels more like a jab at not even so much original Star Trek, but more the Next Generation.
Oh.
A lot of times, like, Deanna Troi is a character who, more often than not, was just there to stand around and look pretty.
I see. And like, I was going to ask you, like, for you being a Star Trek fan, what character was she supposed to embody? Because I can guess, Commander Taggart is or Tim Allen's character is supposed to be William Shatner's role of Commander Kirk. Or Captain Kirk, sorry. Alan Rickman is supposed to be the Spock. But I was wondering, I didn't know who exactly Sigourney Weaver's character was supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, she's sort of similar to Uhura in that her job involves, like, communications, except Uhura's, like, picking up messages and she's just repeating the computer. So she's sort of that. She's also just sort of, the character who's in the show to have big boobs, basically.
Right. Also, it's funny, like later on in the series, in near the end of the movie, her outfit gets ripped, so her bra and cleavage is just shown like to the audience all the time. I was wondering if that was supposed to be like sort of if they were going to make a joke off of that. And I was wondering for the longest time, and eventually I found out that there was like somewhat of a payoff where she was like kind of somehow like somewhat flashed at some of the villains before she was able to kill them in a deleted scene.
Yeah. I also love how the only time you see Alan Rickman's actual hair is near the end when he gets all battle damaged. Like, he even wears that thing to bed. Like, when he's like in his hotel room earlier on in the movie, he's still wearing it.
You're right. I wonder if that's supposed to sort of symbolize, like, the fact that despite how much he resents the role, he still clings on to it.
Maybe he just didn't want to have to sit in makeup the next morning because he was going to be making another appearance, so he was just like, fuck it.
That's true. And you know what? It was really funny is that as I was watching the intro where you see the convention and you see Tim Allen, his character, he's hogging up he's trying to relive the glory days. He's hogging up all the attention. He's like, yeah, look at me. You know who I was 20 years ago. A part of me felt like that is probably maybe what Jason David Frank would do if he was at any sort of convention. He's like, yeah, you know me, I was the Green Ranger, remember? Yeah!
Oh yeah, definitely.
And now I want to have a Galaxy Quest type style movie, but for Power Rangers instead.
Just don't ask when it's coming out. It'll be done when it's done. Everybody's having so much fun, though, in this movie. Sigourney Weaver, I think, had a lot of fun playing sort of the anti-Ripley in this. It was her request to be blonde in the movie. That was not foisted upon her. That was like her thing. She was like, I want to be blonde. Mm-hmm. I think she was having fun being sort of the sex symbol and not necessarily the most intelligent character in the room. Coming off of four appearances as Ripley, where she has to always be so stern and serious. There's one hilarious moment. I don't know if you picked up on this. Near the end of the movie, when they're going through the bowels of the ship, and Justin Long is like telling them where to go over the communicator. When we get to the chompers, which is the most ridiculous thing.
Yeah, it looked like a video game level.
When we get to the chompers, she says, the line that you hear is, "Screw that."
Right.
But if you watch her face, it's very clear that is not what she actually said.
Oh, really? What did she say?
If you watch her lips in that scene, what she actually says is, "Well, fuck that." and then they had to ADR over that for for ratings purposes.
I see. They could keep the cleavage, but not the F-bomb.
I guess so. So that's a fun little moment.
I see. Yeah, it's a little nice though. Like it's that sort of like like 90s era cynicism that there's like hints of it throughout the movie, but it's not so great. It's to where it's like a lot. It's like just completely trashing, shitting on, or making fun of all these tropes, but rather just embracing them. Where it's like, yes, this is stupid, but we're still gonna do it.
Right. I think a lot of people at the time went into this movie expecting not to like it, because they thought, it's going to just be making fun of Star Trek the whole time.
Right, yeah. That's what I sort of thought it was when I first heard of this movie.
But in reality, it's a movie made for the fans, by the fans. It's very much a love letter. A fan saves the day in the end. If it had not been for Justin Long, they would have all been dead.
Right. And it's very touching at the very end of the movie where Tim Allen's character, he's like getting up on stage, he sees Justin Long and his group of friends, he acknowledges them, he salutes them, they salute him right back, where it's like showing that there's as much respect towards the fans as much as the fans respect them.
Yeah, I almost expected Tim Allen to like pull him up on the stage in that moment. Or like at the end of the movie when we see that there's like a new TV show coming on, I was almost expecting him to have a role on the show, like what they did with Sam Rockwell.
Right. Yeah, who knows, man. I understand that there was a IDW comic book series that came out, so who knows, maybe Justin Long's character appeared in that thing. Right.
And he does such a good job in that movie, sort of being that guy. We all know that guy. We've all been that guy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, we were that guy. What are we saying? We're still that guy.
The very beginning of the movie, when he comes up to the table, yes, in the quantum conundrum, you use the secondary deck for the warp drive, and then Tim Allen just like blows him off, and he turns to his friends. I hadn't even got to the relevant conundrum, and he's like he's so disappointed.
Yeah, it's like I've seen so many of those stupid questions at panels where people are like, what did your character feel about this one thing? And no, I think someone told me in one particular panel, I think it was for maybe it was Tomoko Ai, where someone said like, how does her character feel about Titanosaurus, or what does her character do after this one particular thing? Or maybe it wasn't her, maybe it was something else, but it's like, how the fuck should she know? She's an actor.
Even if she had an opinion about that when they were filming the movie, it's been 40 fucking years. Like,
right?
You think she's just going to be like, oh, well, actually, my motivation in that scene was, like, no, that's not going to happen. It's one thing to ask a question like that of the writer.
Yeah.
Because presumably they would have more of a window into that sort of thing. But the actors are just there to read their lines, try to convey a character, and then they move on to another project,
Right. Although I think to this day, the best question, the quote-unquote best question I've ever heard that ever came out of G-Fest is when someone was asking a question to the composer of some of the Millennium films, who was who was a woman. She said, "Do you think you're able to relate to since you made music for Mothra? Do you think you relate to her more because you're a woman?"
Oh, okay, buddy. Yeah.
You know, like, as much as they dog on Star Trek fans in this movie, I'm kind of glad they didn't go into that direction, that sort of awkward direction.
Well, they kind of touch on it, but they don't go full on into it.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, this is still a love letter. There's a funny story on the special features of the DVD. Justin Long mentions that he was concerned that perhaps he was going a little bit too far in his portrayal. And then the director gave him a copy of the documentary Trekkies to watch. And he watched it and he was like, I'm not going far enough.
Right. I feel like maybe, like, are you familiar with the movie Fanboys?
Yes, that's the movie where they try to get their hands on the Phantom Menace, right?
Right. I feel like that movie is perhaps maybe a more cynical. This is like maybe a more cynical jab at fanboys or at fandoms. Sure. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And a lot of the stuff later on in the movie with him was great too. Like when he's trying to tell them how to save the universe, but his mom, who's played by the actress from Seinfeld, who played what was her name? Susan, George's fiance, in season 8 or 7, one of those seasons. She's like having him take out the trash. He's like, I cannot convey to you the gravity of this situation. And then the scene where he's going out with the fireworks, and his parents are like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, well, the ship is coming into orbit, and we need to use the Roman candles for guidance." And they're like, "Okay." And I was like, I relate to this too strongly. It's not good.
I love the line. It's like, at least he's going outside.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. Sam Rockwell is a joy in this movie. He's a joy in most things he's in. I really liked his shtick before they went into space, where he's like the guy who appeared on one episode and now he thinks that he's going to like muscle in on the fame, right. You know? Because those guys definitely exist.
Oh boy, do they.
You see them in all the conventions.
Absolutely, my friend.
But then when we got into space, you know, obviously they couldn't keep doing that shtick for the entire movie. Once they got into space, I really loved what they did with him, where he was a red shirt who knew that he was a red shirt. And so much of the movie revolved around him just being antsy about dying.
Right. I just love that mental breakdown he goes through, where it's like, do you even know my last name?
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, his name is Guy. Like, I'm sorry for anybody who's named Guy in real life, but that's like, you know, you can't get more generic than being a guy named Guy.
It's true. It's true.
It just further emphasizes his sort of like, his disposability, or his self-inflicted disposability.
Yeah, that's like one of the running gags in the movie that's a little bit more sort of inside, you know, for Star Trek, you know, everybody knows, you know, phasers and Beam Me Up Scotty and all that shit, but you have to be a little bit more aware of the tropes to be like, oh, he's a red shirt, and he knows it, you know?
Yeah, I've pretty much heard about the red shirts because it's like sort of goes... It's, I guess, like when you're in deeper into like the world of geekdom, if you can call it that. You hear things about, you know, stormtroopers, they can't shoot for shit, and red shirts, they're always gonna die. So it's like, this was something that wasn't lost on me either. And this would be a thing that that mainstream audiences might not get into, but at least they explained it within the context of the film itself. He's like, I'm a throwaway character. All throwaway characters die in all these episodes, so I'm gonna die. So yeah, I feel like the joke was handled as best as it could for fans and non-fans alike.
Yeah, and Star Trek is chock full of those characters. They show up at the beginning of the episode, and the captain's like, "Oh, Private so-and-so that I've known for years. Come on, we're going to go on this mission." And then they get on the planet, and they immediately get shot or stabbed by an alien monster or something.
Right.
And then just die brutally.
Yeah,
it happens all the time.
And that's what I like. I like how they sort of embrace this sort of their roles as this sort of fictional crew come to life, fictional sci-fi crew come to life, and I like how they kind of go through the sort of general. Even though I'm not a fan of, I haven't been exposed to much Star Trek. It feels like they are going through a classic episode of the original Star Trek, where they encounter an evil villain who is very what would you call it? Battle hardened, they're warmongers essentially, and they communicate to the cast via a big widescreen television monitor. They go to a planet to find something. They interact with the wildlife or the natives, and eventually get back and go on a space battle. It feels like they're sort of marking off all like they're what do you call it? They're crossing all the checks. Or they're going through all the check marks of what makes a typical Star Trek episode.
Definitely, and I really love the plot that they chose to go with in this movie. You know, it would be one thing for Tim Allen and crew to get beamed up to an actual spaceship and like do one of the episodes of Star Trek where they just like meet a weird alien thing that wants to be their friend or whatever. But the fact that they've gone in with what we have here, the villain threat in this movie is very sort of Wrath of Khan. It's not a whole lot of like big like stakes and like world-ending super weapons and things of that nature. It's more just like ship against ship, sort of a battle of wits between the main characters and the villain. It's
like the scales are not like super high. It's just this one dude on this one ship with this one crew. It's not so much like an entire. They make it sound at the beginning like it's a full-on alien invasion, but it's really just one guy against one. It's just one ship, one-on-one ship.
Right, and it's good because it allows the stakes to be more personal, and it allows them to spend more time on, you know, the characters and the comedy and the relationships and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, very much so. And as for the villain, what were your thoughts on him? Because I got this sort of sense that, like, he came off as, like, despite the fact that, like, the actor behind him portrayed him the best that he could, and, you know, the special effects for him, which I do want to get into later, are...
Oh, yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the effects. I actually have a whole thing about that.
Yeah, you know, he looks tremendous. I feel like he came off as a very, like, simplistic kind of villain, and perhaps he was intentionally made to be as, you know, unsympathetic, as just, you know, embrace the sort of over-the-top, cheesy corniness that a super villainous villain could, or antagonist could possibly be. But I could see some people having a problem here where maybe they would say that his role is maybe perhaps a bit too simplistic for some people's taste, especially when we live in an era where people sort of kind of now have this sort of expectation where they want all their villains to be like Thanos level of deep.
Yeah, he's not a very complex villain. But he is a pretty engaging one, I think. I think he has a lot of screen presence. The scene, I think the best scene of his in the entire movie, but one of the best scenes in the movie really, is when he's torturing Mathazar.
Yeah.
Who's another great performance in this movie, by the way. That actor actually sort of invented the whole way that the Thermians sort of walk and talk in the movie.
Okay.
That all came from that guy. I forget the actor's name. It's Enrico something. He's torturing that guy, and then he sees the quote-unquote historical documents.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we should have said at the top there are spoilers in this.
Right. I guess like from here on now, like every episode will be a spoiler-filled discussion.
Yeah, so just know that going in. And then I guess we're just sort of assuming that you've seen the movie because we didn't really bother to give you a synopsis. But anyway, so he sees the historical documents, which are in reality just episodes of a really bad looking TV show. I love how intentionally bad they made those clips. And he instantly gets it. He understands what's happening. And he
knows the concept of actors and all of that stuff.
He has such glee when he's like, explain it to him as you would a child.
And it's
a great
Yeah,
It's a great scene in the movie. It's probably his most sort of villainous moment, even though a lot of the rest of the movie is him like being like, blow them all up. For some reason, the meanest moment in the movie is like, tell him you fucking lied to his face. Do it. I want to see you do it.
I want to see this man's soul be crushed.
And again, the guy who plays Mathazar is so good in that scene too.
Yeah, that was really like the most, like, he looks up to all these actors with such a childlike sense of wonder, and to see his spirit crushed, his hopes and dreams like destroyed before his very eyes, it's almost like telling a child that Santa Claus doesn't exist, and it's such a heartbreaking moment. It's like, I love how emotional this movie gets, because it gets you to care about these characters so much.
Yeah. And Tim Allen is good in that scene too, because you can see him like trying to explain this, and then he's heartbroken, you know.
Right.
It's a really dramatic scene. How did you like the sort of, since we're sort of talking about it now, the sort of central premise of the movie, which is aliens get a hold of these TV episodes and think that they're real?
I think it's really brilliant. I find it fascinating that you have this they came up with this race of aliens who have no concept of acting, theatrics, performances. They kind of see it just simply as like lying, because, you know, they're so innocent-minded, they can't fathom the idea of pretending to be something you're not. And it's a very genius concept. In fact, it pretty much reminded me so much of the Three Amigos. This is essentially like the Three Amigos in space, and a part of me wants to see this sort of treatment. Like, what the Three Amigos was for Westerns, this was it for, like, sci-fi television, and so now I kind of want to see this sort of be played around with other franchises, actually.
There's also a similar episode to this. You might recall this. There's a similar episode of Futurama, in which the aliens from Omicron Persei 8 have been watching old reruns of Murphy Brown, which they don't know are reruns because of the time dilation, and they come to Earth pissed off because the show got canceled and forced them to like create a finale.
Right, and they did it as well. They'd made up their own single female lawyer right on the spot. And, like, wasn't there an episode where, like, the aliens took the bodies, the heads of the Star Trek crew, gave them real bodies, and then have them reenact episodes of Star Trek for him?
Yes, and that is a great episode. That's like top 5 Futurama for me. A lot of great Star Trek references all throughout Futurama. Really. Oh
yeah, like Futurama is like another sort of like send off. I want to say that's like that's definitely a much more comedic, satirical take of Star Trek than this project is.
Yeah, it's the most out of the 3 things that are like this, because the Orville kind of evolves into its own thing over the course of the first 2 seasons.
Okay.
It's much more dramedy than really comedy.
I want to say like this one is definitely, of all the Star Trek sort of send-offs, homages, parodies, what have you, this one is definitely the most meta in terms of its premise. We're acknowledging, yes, it is a TV show, and now look at us, it's a TV show about tropes, and we're doing the tropes, but in real life. And I do like all of that. The one thing I was a little bit confused with was the Omega-13 plot device, the MacGuffin of this film, where apparently this was a MacGuffin from the TV show, which was purely fictional, and somehow the Mathazar and his alien team was able to recreate it, but they don't know what it is, and they don't know no one knows what it is, save for the hardcore fans who speculate what it is, and the villain wants it. So I'm thinking, how are they able to recreate the Omega-13, which is purely fictional in the story, in this TV show? They recreated it from scratch, but how do they themselves not know what it does?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's like the one thing that doesn't really add up.
Yeah, if the Omega...
I thought the same thing. Because they're able to explain everything else so well. It's like, the actor who played the helmsman had actually like made up what each button does, which is like a common thing that people do when they are in sort of sci-fi shows like this.
Right.
William Hartnell, the first Doctor, did a similar thing with the TARDIS. Like he knew what every button did. Mm-hmm. A lot of people who do this sort of thing in science fiction shows, they do that. So anyway, he had worked out what each of the controls did, and so the aliens based the controls in their ship off of what they saw him do. and like it's everything that the nerds on Earth have on their computers is accurate because it's based on the same footage that the aliens watched. Like they're able to get around so many of these logical questions through that premise, that the Omega-13 is really the one instance in which it doesn't quite work logically.
Yeah, like, I would have wished that the Omega-13 was like a MacGuffin that Mathazar and his species owned previously, and they sort of just built the ship around it.
Right. But you can't do that, though, because you have to have Justin Long to tell Tim Allen that it might be a bomb or it might be a time travel device.
Right, so that's a really sticky situation there.
Yeah, they sort of wrote themselves into a corner on that one. I wonder if they were even aware of it, honestly.
Maybe they just thought it would be silly to say, oh, look, this secret MacGuffin from the TV show is now a real thing, so now what happens when this real MacGuffin is now in the real world and real aliens want it now?
And that's what's even more ridiculous about the Chompers scene. They have no function. They're only there because they existed in the show.
Yeah.
And that great line where Sigourney's like, Weaver's like, I'm not doing this. This episode was badly written. There's so many great lines of dialogue in this movie. The other one I wanted to mention, because we were talking about the premise earlier of like the aliens misinterpreting the TV shows.
Right.
There's that moment where I think it's Sigourney Weaver again. She's like, well, surely you don't think that Gilligan's Island is a documentary? And then cut to the aliens and they're like, those poor people.
Yeah, that was also hilarious. Now it makes me wonder, like, what other sort of shows. I mean, this kind of opens the door for like further future possibilities as to what other kind of shows could be misinterpreted by any other alien species. Like, although it does I remember that this concept was also used in Pixels, if you remember, where an alien species got a hold of a lot of like video game footage and reinterpreted that as like a declaration of war. So they somehow made their own pixel-based aliens based on Earth's video games.
That was also an episode of Futurama. Remember, the Earth was invaded
by the planet Nintendo 64.
Yeah, the planet was invaded by video game characters, and only Fry could save the day. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, this is like, I feel like this is a very easy premise to build a whole movie or TV show or whatever, what have you. Build a whole story around, essentially. Yeah. Infinite possibilities, really. Totally, yeah. But even though I feel like you could go far with this sort of premise, I'm glad that this movie stayed as just a single movie at the end of the day. I heard that there were like rumors or them trying to kickstart trying to get a sequel off the ground, and I do know that there's the comic series that sort of continues off from this. But I feel like as much as you can do with this, I feel like this worked best as a one and done project, I feel. Yeah,
I could maybe see an animated series if you really wanted to. But yeah, I don't think I would want a sequel to this, especially with Alan Rickman being dead.
Oh, yeah. You got one of the best parts of the movie is no longer with us.
Yeah. He has a great arc that we should talk about in a moment.
Oh, yeah.
But they get so much comedy mileage out of this ship that nobody really knows how it works. The aliens don't really know how it works. They built it. They built it based on the show, but they don't know what any of the things are really supposed to do. Mm-hmm. The actors obviously don't really know how it works because they're just actors.
Right.
There's that great moment with Tony Shalhoub where he's like, "Oh, we could bypass the Matrix," and you can tell that he's just like repeating shit that those guys had said to him.
Right.
Like,
right.
What do you think?
And Tim Allen's like, "Yeah, let's do the thing that you said they did."
Yeah. He's a lot of fun in this character. He's probably the most sort of understated character, but he's having a good time no matter what crazy shit is going on.
He's just the most laid back dude, and he's just like, whatever. I'm just here for fun, man.
Like when they first teleport him onto the ship with like that weird gel thing, all the other actors freak out. He just shows up and he's like, that was wild, or whatever he says. And later on when they're in the pod and it's crashing, he's just sitting there eating the snacks.
Right.
And then probably the funniest scene with him is when he's having sex with the alien lady.
Right.
Uh,
You just see Sam Rockwell's like expression. He's like, "Oh God, oh no, this is all kinds of wrong.
it's not right.
It's a
Yeah.
sick world we live in with sick people."
Yeah. Yeah, that was all good stuff. I can't think of the actor's name,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to remember character names because everybody in this movie kind of has two characters' names. They have their fake actor
Right.
name and then their character from the show name. But so I'm just gonna have to go there and say that the black guy, who probably sticks out the least in my mind, but is also really enjoyable in the film.
Uh-huh.
It's like, what if? It's like I imagine that if this happened to if this same scenario happened to the Star Trek: The Next Generation crew, for example, he's the Will Wheaton. You know, he was a kid. He was a kid when he did this shit in the past, and now he's like remembering, and you see little flashes where it's coming back to him, and he has that great scene where he's piloting the ship out at the space dock, and he rubs it up against the wall.
Yeah. It was funny enough. There was this other video. What's his name? I think Oliver Harper. He made a great video on Galaxy Quest, and he pointed out a small plot hole where the wings themselves are the ones that's scratching against the hull of that space deck. But when you see the ship moving, only the cone is the one that's getting the scratch on it, not the wing itself.
That's true. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, but otherwise, that's a great joke right there. It's just this very long, very awkward scene of him causing so much damage to the ship. It kind of reminds me of that just scene from SpongeBob where it's like, "You're good, you're good, you're good.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we'll buff out those scratches in no time."
Yeah, and it's the sort of thing that does happen sometimes in those old Star Trek movies where it's like, take us out, and then you just get a minute of drifting out of space dock.
Right, and it's another joke that has a great payoff where I looked it up. The actor's name is Daryl Mitchell, and so his character is he's watching episodes of the old TV show and it's like, okay, so how do I move my hands? Okay, which buttons did I push in the show? He's studying himself in the show to learn how to pilot the ship, and by the end you have yourself a great space chase for a climax.
Definitely. So we've sort of been dancing around talking about different characters and sort of plot things. The best part of this movie to me is Alan Rickman's character. I think he has sort of the most thematic stuff going on, and
Mm-hmm.
really that all comes down to this amazing arc that he has over the course of the film. His character has this catchphrase that he just hates having to say.
Mm-hmm. By Grabthar's hammer, by the sons of Worvan, you shall be avenged.
That's the one. And over the course of the movie, he befriends this one alien. The alien winds up getting killed, and then he says the line to him
Mm-hmm.
in a really earnest way. And it means a lot to this alien, because this alien has devoted his life to this fake alien philosophy that he saw on a TV show.
Right.
Imagine doing that. And so it's such a poignant moment and a really great scene.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's followed up with the comedic genius of Alan Rickman going crazy and murdering a bunch of aliens.
Yeah, right. And I do love that. As he goes along his journey, he learns to appreciate the role that, while he may deemed as silly and embarrassing, others have dedicated their whole lives to. There are so many people who have been truly inspired by his work, and so he takes comfort in upon realizing that. And it's at that point he actually comes to view his position as an entertainer. He views his role in a brand new light upon seeing the effect that it had on so many people. In this case, both on Earth and throughout across the galaxy. In this case, it's a very heartwarming moment. The moment where it's like, at that point, he realized what those words mean to so many people beyond just these were just a couple of lines that I would say every so often on a TV show. For many people, he realized the dramatic weight behind those words.
Exactly. And that's the other really relatable thing about this movie, in addition to being relatable because it's parodying Star Trek, which is this thing that's very big in the cultural consciousness, especially in 1999. This was in the midst of sort of the Star Trek renaissance that began with TNG and ended with Enterprise. So not only is it doing that, which is very relatable to a lot of people, and also doing all this stuff about fandoms and like conventions and like nerd culture, which is very, relatable to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it also introduces all these characters who are stereotypes of actors that we all know and that absolutely exist in the real world.
Yeah, definitely makes the whole thing very relatable to audiences. There are so many people who have encountered actors such as these. They read stories, watch documentaries about the stories of these type of actors, and even for people like you and I who are like movie people, we sort of like to follow where certain actors' lives go before and after their their runaway successes.
Right, and he is such the classic sort of trope of the classically trained British actor. I was Richard III, damn it, he says, who now has sort of been pigeonholed into what he considers schlock for a majority of his career. It feels a lot like Christopher Lee towards the end of those Dracula movies. He just wants out, man.
Yeah, he felt like this stuff was beneath him.
He just wanted to die. And then he has this journey of self-discovery. And again, this is modeled sort of on what happened to Leonard Nimoy in real life, just told over the course of 2 hours. This journey of discovery, of coming to terms with this thing that he's done. And actually, isn't he so fortunate to have done this thing that resonates with so many people across galaxies, apparently?
Would you say this discovery involved a lot of Star Trekking, a Star Trek discovery, perhaps?
Yes, but way better.
And less disappointing, I'm assuming.
Just so much better in every way.
That's another thing. I hate to go off track from Alan Rickman, but I do want to mention that apparently a lot of people have considered this movie, despite its sort of like unofficial nature, people would say many people would consider this one of the best Star Trek movies, even though it's technically not a Star Trek movie at all.
It really is. I mean, it gets a lot of the tropes right. A lot of the lore is right, although they change names of things. It's very much Star Trek. They even have an away
in everything but name.
Yeah, they even have an away mission in the middle of this movie.
Yeah, we never talked about that.
That's really where Tim Allen shines, like doing his sort of Captain Kirk impression. I mean, he's rolling around in the desert for no reason and
taking off his shirt.
Gets his shirt ripped off and has a fight with a monster.
The
little disturbing alien creatures. That great moment where they're like, they look like children, and then when they capture Tim Allen, one of the aliens is like, he looks like a child.
Oh yeah, I do remember that line.
That was an interesting parallel. The moment where she was like, "Oh, they're gonna help the hurt one," and then they just eat him.
Right. I know Sam Rockwell was like, no. I know how these sort of subversions go on the show.
It reminded me of the 1998, I think it was, Lost in Space. The spiders, they were like, they eat their wounded. So all of that stuff was a lot of fun and felt like it came right out of insert Star Trek series here.
Right. Were there any random giant monsters in Star Trek?
Usually they didn't have the budget to go that big.
I figured.
But, occasionally you'll get something pretty out there.
Although I guess like the closest thing I can compare this to is probably like maybe the invisible monster from Forbidden Planet.
Sure. The closest parallel visually is Captain Kirk fighting the Gorn in the original series.
That's what I was also thinking too. They were going onto the planet, I was thinking, oh, is this they're gonna fight a Gorn-like entity? But then I figured it's like, well, the main villain is kind of a mixture of the Gorn and the Klingon, so it's like, well, of course, it's going to be a some sort of generic rock monster, but a well done generic rock monster.
Yes. They even sort of reference that episode. This is another one of those jokes that's sort of, inside baseball as far as Star Trek is concerned.
Oh,
in that episode, Captain Kirk defeats the Gorn by using things in the environment to fashion like a makeshift gun.
Uh-huh.
He finds like minerals and makes gunpowder, and he uses a big like piece of bamboo as the shaft, and he like sticks diamonds in there as projectiles. And there's a moment when they're like talking to Tim Allen over the intercom, and they're like giving him different ideas of how to stop the rock monster. At one point, Sam Rockwell is like, "You need to form some sort of weapon. Like, look around you. Is there anything you can use to like form like a lathe?"
So that's what that line was referring to.
Yeah.
Okay, even then, that just goes to show how good a joke can work even without the context. Because I just liked his like comment where he mentioned something along the lines of, "It's like, I'm in the desert. What can I use? What can I possibly use?"
Right. Yeah. See, that was all well done. Again, that whole sequence just feels like something straight out of one of the series, and I'm glad that it's there. I'm glad that we actually got a little alien planet action, and it wasn't just all on the ship the whole time.
Right.
It makes it feel like a more complete sort of lampooning.
And I guess like this should smoothly transition into the special effects of this movie, since we're talking about like the little aliens and the rock monster, the planet, and everything. This was definitely in 1999, so digital effects were on the rise, but yet I feel like we're still during that peak moment of practical effects where practical effects still reigned supreme and CGI was only used when it was absolutely necessary. And I think this movie is a great example of striking the right balance. And
definitely. The CG that is used is a little dated, but it actually holds up pretty well for 1999.
Yeah, I'd say this is definitely on the level of... This was done by ILM, so this was like, you can't get more professional than ILM. I guess there's Digital Domain, which I believe was James Cameron's company, but ILM was, they did a standout job. I believe they were the guys behind Jurassic Park, so they really upped their... It was a very ambitious means of using CGI for the creatures and for the space battles. The space battles look great in my opinion. The creatures and rock monster, they look great from a distance, but the closer they get to the camera, that's where you notice that sort of bizarre smoothness.
I think the rock monster works better than the little alien baby creatures because the rock, I guess, is a little easier to pull off than skin.
I was actually gonna say the opposite, because I think like maybe the rock monster, he was too smooth for it to look like actual rocks. He looked like he was made out of like round pebbles as opposed to boulders.
Depends on the type of rock, I guess.
I suppose, yeah. Although I will say, like, having so many aliens in one single shot was very impressive to see. Like, the only thing I saw previously with this amount of CG characters walking around in one shot would be like a Starship Troopers with the what were they called? The bugs, I think.
Yeah. It's also important to remember that this movie came out the same year, I think, as The Phantom Menace. That was 99, wasn't it?
Yes, you're right. This was The Phantom Menace, yeah. So The Phantom Menace definitely showed off a more ambitious use of CGI with, like, very little to no practical effects outside of maybe, like, costuming and maybe, like, on location shooting. So,
yeah, and that has aged so much worse.
No, God, yeah. It's kind of sad to say, like, George Lucas really took pride in the CGI he used in that movie, and yet this movie, with its minimal use, looks a hell of a lot better. Yeah, I still get nightmares from those. Gungans that, like, those background Gungans with, like, almost no texture to them whatsoever.
Yeah, but 90% of the effects in this movie are practical. One thing they did that's really interesting, Star Trek is famous for, like, the ship shaking, and the way they would traditionally do that effect is that they would just shake the camera and the actors would move around as if they were being shaken.
Right.
That's the way they did in the original series, and I think that was the easiest thing moving forward, especially on a TV budget. But in this movie, the bridge set was all built on a gigantic gimbal.
Oh, okay.
So they actually were shaking the set.
Oh, wow.
and it makes it look a little bit more real. And then if you notice when you watch the clips from the actual show, they do it in the traditional sort of Star Trek style where they're clearly just shaking the camera. And I thought that was a nice touch. It was a nice way of, they do a really good job of making that look like, you know, a crappy TV show from 15 years ago, and then juxtaposing that with what it looks like when they actually go into space.
Right, yeah, that is a rather clever touch. And another use of practical effects would be like the fact they use models for the ships. I feel like that's another lost art that's, you know, been done away with the convenience of digital technology. I assume majority of like the ships used in Star Trek and Star Wars movies have all been models, like well-made models on placed atop of like these gorgeous backdrops and you know, lavish sets. But nowadays, like, models have been like almost done away with in favor of just pure CG ships.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the ships were CG in some shots, but there are definitely models being used, and it's better for it, I think.
Right, yeah.
And the most impressive thing, I think, are the creature effects in the movie, the practical creature effects, which you mentioned ILM before, having worked on Jurassic Park. Yeah. Another connection to Jurassic Park is that the practical creature effects in this movie were actually done by the great Stan Winston.
Ah, yes, good old Stan.
Who the listeners probably know from everything you love, Terminator, Predator, Alien, take your pick.
Right.
I actually have a little excerpt here that I would like to read. This comes from one of my favorite books, The Winston Effect, The Art and History of Stan Winston's Studio by Jody Duncan, with a foreword by James Cameron. Hold on, I took some pictures of this. Winston's studio created the octopus-like Thermians, as they are revealed in their true form, as well as the bad guy alien Ceres, his reptilian henchman, and an alien pig lizard. Winston's crew built 5 large, brightly colored, cable-operated silicone puppets for the Thermians, separately molding 45 tentacles for each. For Ceres, the mechanical department used a technology that had been developed for the Planet of the Apes project, which enabled an actor's facial expressions to be translated to an outer makeup appliance, a problem Stan Winston had been working on in one way or another ever since he'd built the Wookiee heads for the Star Wars Holiday Special 20 years earlier. So, I omitted a lot of the text there. If you're interested in hearing more about that, I would definitely recommend tracking down that book. You'll find information in there on everything that Stan Winston ever did. I mean, from heart beeps all the way down to Pumpkinhead. So yeah, they had a thing for Ceres where the facial expressions that the actor made inside of the mask were actually able to translate to the mask itself. And it shows. There's a lot of great facial stuff in the movie, which I had assumed was all animatronic, but is actually like a sort of primitive performance capture, I suppose.
It's very interesting. I mean, I felt like hearing about like the great detail they went into creating these numerous facial recognition, facial following appendages, and, you know, tentacles, and even looking at in the film itself, you can see like the vast amount of detail they put into their exoskeleton armor. You can see he's like almost breathing through his shoulders as his shoulder pads move to open and close. His wings open occasionally. I
love those shoulder pad things. I don't know if they're supposed to be armor or if they're like biological, if they're a part of his body.
Right.
But it's like they're like gills almost. He's breathing through them. It's very interesting. Yeah, and then he has those like wing things on his back that pop up when he's angry. He almost looks like Gigan.
Right. And he's also got like this sort of a ponytail made out of spider legs that occasionally move a bit here and there. It's such a very well designed, very detailed, it's a beautifully ugly creation that they made. Same goes for like the good guy aliens as well in their octopus-like forms. It kind of goes to show, like, I guess I can understand why Hollywood has abandoned this lost art of practical effects, because I can imagine how much time it took to create and perfect the technology used to bring these creatures to life. I guess it's like it's a much less time consuming process to make them all CG, but the end result is just so worth it. And again, this is just a movie that's a great example of that.
Yeah. I think it comes down to that. I think it comes down to the time involved. because practical effects have to be prepared before the movie is shot, whereas with digital, they can just shoot what they want and then insert it later.
Right. We'll fix it in post.
Right. Joe Rogan recently had Rick Baker on his podcast.
Okay.
And he told a story about working on The Wolfman 2010, which was a nightmare, apparently.
Okay.
And apparently they were going back to do reshoots for some kind of scene, and they needed the werewolf to be running, and they needed him to build like some sort of new like suit or something. I don't remember the details, but they were like, "We need you to do this in 3 weeks." And he was like, "There's no way I can get this done in 3 weeks. Like all the molds are over in England somewhere, and like I don't. There's no way that I can do this in 3 weeks. And then you still got to get all the other people together. And like, oh well, we already got all the rest of the crew together. We contacted them 3 months ago." And he's like, "Wait, you've known about this for 3 months, and you're only giving me 3 weeks? Like, that's the kind of bullshit that goes on in Hollywood all the time, you know?"
Right. They want everything to be done right away, on the spot, as fast as possible. And it's just like, we got to make a shit ton of projects in a certain amount of time so we can pump them all out week after week and then focus on the next batch of projects. So yeah, in that case, I can totally see how this sort of mentality would lead to the the gradual extermination or phasing out of practical effects.
Yeah,
because that shit take too long.
I feel like there's a little bit of a resurgence going on, though.
Potentially, yeah. Do you remember that Kickstarter short film that was like a chase scene featuring a Gillman-esque sea monster?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I knew it came out, and people were like, "Oh, that's it," and the guys were like, "Yeah, that was it. That was the whole point of this."
What do you expect? It's a Kickstarter. It's not.
Yeah, you can't fund an entire movie off of Kickstarter alone.
No,
unless you're Kung Fury.
Unless you're Kung Fury.
Even then, you're only going to get a short film out of that.
God bless Kung Fury.
Right.
Are we going to get that sequel?
Yeah, we're still waiting, fellas. We're still waiting. What was it called? Laser Unicorn.
Yeah.
Yep. So let's see. Anything else before, or is that it? For us to wrap things? Is it time for us to wrap things up?
Let's see. We covered the effects. We covered the.
How about the music? Because I guess there's not much I can personally say about the music other than it feels very Star Trek-y, and it's very upbeat, very action-y, heroic. It embraces that sort of like a fantastical element of space exploration and space adventure. And this is something that definitely like helps set the mood for the movie.
Yes, it's definitely good movie music. I guess if I had to criticize it, I would say that it might be a tad generic just because right now, and I just rewatched this movie yesterday for the purposes of this review, right now I can't think of any of the tunes, you know, I mean, I can't like hum it, you know.
True.
So it doesn't stick with you, but it does its job very well. It is definitely, you know, sort of the quintessential Star Trek music without being Star Trek. It is very high heroics and action adventure music.
It's like it's like the best bootleg Star Trek music you can ask for.
Exactly. Again, very of the period, you know.
Yeah. It's like this was during that time where everyone was sort of going for that sort of Alan Silvestri, John Williams-esque music. I'm not sure if John Williams did this or Alan Silvestri, but it sounds like that sort of Spielbergian George Lucas camp.
I wonder who did the music for that movie. Let me just look that up real quick. That's a good question.
I'll do the same as well. Let's see. I'll cut this out as well. David Newman.
Okay.
Yeah, what did he do?
David Newman.
Let's see. Let's see, he did Frankenweenie, Critters, Brave Little Toaster, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, let's see, DuckTales the movie, Ice Age.
Yeah, Ice Age.
Rover Dangerfield, The Mighty Ducks.
Professor.
Okay, so this guy has definitely been around. Oh, The Flintstones.
Yeah, he does a lot of comedies.
The Phantom.
Makes sense.
Anastasia, Jingle All the Way. Okay, I can see a little comparison with Jingle All the Way there.
I can see that, yeah, definitely. Scooby-Doo 2002 was his.
Okay. Death to Smoochie, I've heard about that show. Never saw. Daddy Daycare. Okay, so The Cat in the Hat. Are we there yet? Norbit. Alvin and the Chipmunks, The Squeakquel.
Okay, so he's no Bernard Herrmann, but
right.
his movie does its job.
He has done a lot of
very
mainstream
iconic
work.
films.
Yeah, he's done a lot of. You know what? He's that guy who does a lot of mainstream work where the music is not recognizable at all, but it definitely fits the various genres that he's doing in. In fact, he seems to be one of those like jack of all trades, master of none type of. I mean, it's a very harsh critique for this kind of person, for an artist, but it's like, hey, it's been getting him consistent work all through all these decades.
Definitely. I think it's good music. It just isn't the most memorable thing in the world. It doesn't stick with you when you're finished watching the film.
Right. Although apparently he's going to be doing West Side Story with Steven Spielberg for 2020. I can't think of any. Was doing West Side Story.
I can't think of any specific examples, but yeah, there are definitely tracks in Jingle All the Way. Especially like surrounding like the Turbo Man character.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
That are very reminiscent of what he did here in Galaxy Quest.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So other than that, anything else?
No, I guess that's it, really.
All right. So I'm wondering
the maiden voyage of Fully Endorsed.
Right. I don't think we really need to do sort of ratings for this show, other than hey, we fully endorsed it, or you fully endorsed it previously, and now I, too, will fully endorse it.
Yes, I think we can get by with a sort of Siskel and Ebert-esque sort of thumbs up, thumbs down situation here.
Absolutely.
So we definitely both recommend that you check out Jingle All the Way. Not Jingle. Shit. I do recommend that you check out Jingle All the Way, but that's not what we're discussing.
Right. For very different reasons, as opposed to Galaxy Quest. The best Star Trek movie never made.
Exactly. Definitely check out Galaxy Quest. I think there's a lot. If you have any appreciation for Star Trek, there's something for you here. If you've ever just been a part of a fandom, there's something for you here. If you have convention experience, no matter what kind of convention it is, you're going to find some of this very relatable. There really is something here for everybody, I think. And if you were ever worried about seeing it because you are like Andres here and you don't know very much about Star Trek, it's very accessible, and I think you'll have a great time. And just watch a darn good movie.
Absolutely, yep. There's nothing more that can be added there.
So, Andres, I guess now comes the part of the show where you announce to the audience. I already know. You announce to the audience what we will be watching and reviewing next time.
Yes, so for next time, I decided to just, harken back. I decided to harken back to my roots as a Godzilla/Kaiju YouTuber and go all the way back to the history. If you know the history of my channel, you know that I started off reviewing a bunch of indie kaiju films that not many people knew about at the time, and now it's finally getting the recognition it deserves, in my opinion, as it's recently got an official DVD and Blu-ray and even VHS release through SRS Cinema, and that is Deep Sea Monster Rego, or Rego King of the Sea Monsters, as it's apparently been retitled for its Blu-ray release. So yeah, we're going to take a look at this. I believe it was a 2005 indie film. You may know its more popular sequel, Deep Sea Monster Raiga, which maybe we'll get into in a later episode. But yes, I decided to take a look at this World War II period piece where a crew, where the battleship Yamato and its crew encounter a giant monster, and all havoc and a bunch of chaos and havoc ensues. So, will Dylan enjoy it as much as I did? Will I still enjoy it as much as I did back in 2012? We'll see. But for now, it's something that I currently fully endorse, and so you'll have to stick around and see if Dylan will as well.
Very excited. This is something that's been on my radar for a very long time. And I just haven't gotten around to seeing it. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, I feel like it's a rather timely review, given its its newfound appreciation and current American release.
Definitely. So yeah, tune in next time, probably roughly 2 weeks from now. We'll see. The editing process and all that, to see us review Deep Sea Monster Raigo. Raigo?
I believe it's Raigo, because the monster...
Raigo.
Yeah, Re.
Right, R-E. Japanese. Hell of a language. Raigo. Deep Sea Monster Raigo.
All right, then. So, would you like to care to sign us out?
Sure. We don't have an outro for this yet.
I guess not. Do you want to make one up on the spot?
Take care, everybody. That's terrible. We'll think of something.
Watch the skies, my friends.
Watch the skies.
Take care, everybody.